I don't believe in curses. At least, I didn't. Not until I spent 3 nights in Bryce Canyon. Not until I found what my grandfather left behind. My name is Elena Vasquez. I'm 34 years old. I've been a field geologist for the U.S. Geological Survey for 9 years. I study rock formations, erosion patterns, sediment layers. I deal in facts, in evidence, in things I can measure and quantify and explain. I've spent my career in some of the most remote places in America: the Badlands of Montana, the volcanic fields of Hawaii, the ancient seabeds of Nevada, glacial deposits in Alaska, desert formations in Death Valley. I've collected samples in places where the silence is so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. I've mapped rock formations that haven't been touched by human hands in millions of years. I've slept alone in places where the nearest human being was 50 miles away, where there's no cell service, no rescue, no one to hear you if something goes wrong. I've never been afraid of the dark. I've never believed in anything I couldn't prove. I've always thought that the scariest things in the wilderness were the explainable ones: dehydration, exposure, falls, flash floods, the things that geology and physics and biology could account for. But what happened in Bryce Canyon last October, what I found in my grandfather's old campsite, there's no scientific explanation for that. And believe me, I've tried to find one. I've run every test I can think of, consulted colleagues, reviewed the literature on mass hallucinations and desert mirages and the psychological effects of isolation. None of it explains what I experienced. None of it explains the voice I heard. None of it explains what's still following me. My grandfather was a uranium prospector in the 1950s. One of those men who wandered the Utah desert with a Geiger counter, looking for the radioactive deposits that would make them rich. It was the atomic age. The government was paying premium prices for uranium ore. Young men from all over the country flooded into the Colorado Plateau, convinced they'd strike it rich. They called it uranium fever. My grandfather caught it bad. He was 23 years old when he drove his beat-up Ford into the Utah desert with nothing but a Geiger counter, a Army surplus tent, and enough supplies for 3 months. He was going to find his fortune. He was going to make his name. He was going to become one of the uranium millionaires whose stories filled the newspapers. Most of them found nothing. Some of them found wealth, and a few of them found something else entirely. My grandfather was in that last category. He never talked about what happened to him in Utah, never explained why he left prospecting after only 2 years, despite being one of the more successful claimants. Never told anyone why he refused to go back to the Southwest for the rest of his life, why he flinched when someone mentioned Utah, why he had nightmares well into his 60s. Yeah, he died when I was 12, left me his old field journals and a set of coordinates. Coordinates I didn't understand until I was old enough to become a geologist myself. The coordinates pointed to a spot in the backcountry of Bryce Canyon. Not the tourist areas, not the viewpoints and paved trails. Deep in the wilderness, in a section of the park that most visitors never see. I'd been meaning to check them for years: professional curiosity, family history, the kind of mystery that nags at you until you finally do something about it. Last October, I finally had the time. 3 days off, good weather, a chance to combine work and personal research. I filed my trip plan with the ranger station, told my sister where I was going, packed my gear, and drove into the desert. But here's the thing about Bryce Canyon that most people don't understand. It's not really a canyon at all. It's a series of natural amphitheaters carved into the edge of a plateau. Millions of years of erosion creating thousands of hoodoos. Those strange, twisted spires of red and orange and white rock that look like nothing else on Earth. The geology is fascinating. Limestone and dolomite and mudstone, all layered together over 60 million years, then carved by ice and water and wind into shapes that seem almost deliberate, almost designed. The Native Americans who lived here called them red rocks standing like men in a bowl-shaped canyon. The Paiute had legends about them, said they were the legend people, turned to stone by the trickster god Coyote as punishment for their wickedness. I always thought those were just stories, folk explanations for unusual geology, the kind of myths that grow up around any landscape that looks too strange to be natural. During the day, it's beautiful, otherworldly, but beautiful. Tourists come from all over the world to photograph the hoodoos at sunrise and sunset, when the light turns the rock to gold and rose and deep crimson. At night, those hoodoos look like something else entirely, like figures, like watchers, like a congregation of silent witnesses waiting for something to happen, like the legend people, frozen in the act of judgment. I reached my grandfather's coordinates on the first day. It was a small alcove in the rock, hidden from the main trails, protected from the wind, the kind of place a prospector would choose for a base camp. There were still signs of human presence, a fire ring made of stacked stones, rusted tin cans half buried in the sand, the remains of what might have been a tent platform. And something else, something scratched into the rock wall at the back of the alcove. Words, in my grandfather's handwriting. I recognized it from his journals. Don't sleep here. Don't listen. Don't follow. I should have listened to him, should have packed up my gear and hiked back to the trailhead, should have trusted that my grandfather, a practical man, a rational man, had a reason for carving that warning into solid rock. I looked at those words for a long time. Don't sleep here. Don't listen. Don't follow. 3 simple rules, 3 simple instructions. The kind of thing someone would carve only if they absolutely, desperately needed it to be remembered. The kind of thing someone would carve when they knew their letters and journals might not survive, but stone would. My grandfather had been terrified of something, terrified enough to spend hours carving a warning into solid rock. And I was about to ignore it, because I'm a scientist. I don't believe in warnings carved in stone. I believe in evidence. So I made camp, set up my tent, cooked my dinner, watched the sunset over the hoodoos, and waited to see what would happen. The sunset was spectacular. Bands of gold and orange and deep crimson spreading across the western sky. The hoodoos turned from white to pink to blood red as the light changed. I took photographs, made notes in my field journal, tried to pretend this was just another assignment. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The hoodoos stood around me like a jury, thousands of them, millions of years old, watching me with eyeless faces, waiting. When the last light faded, the temperature dropped fast. Desert nights are cold. I crawled into my tent, zipped up my sleeping bag, listened to the silence, and tried to sleep. The first night was quiet, almost too quiet. No animal sounds, no wind, not even the usual settling noises that rocks make as they cool after a hot day. Just silence. Deep, heavy silence, the kind of silence that feels like something is holding its breath. I slept poorly, kept waking up with the sense that something was watching me. But every time I looked outside my tent, nothing. Just the hoodoos, standing in the moonlight, casting shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. The second night was different. I woke at 2:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I checked my watch immediately. Something had woken me, a sound, not loud, not sudden, just present, like a whisper at the edge of hearing, like someone speaking just quietly enough that you can't make out the words. I lay in my sleeping bag, heart pounding, barely breathing, listening. The whisper continued, rising and falling in a rhythm that almost sounded like speech, like someone was having a conversation just outside my tent. A one-sided conversation, like they were waiting for me to respond. I thought about my grandfather's warning. Don't listen. But how do you not listen? How do you unhear something that's already in your head? The whisper got clearer, words starting to emerge from the noise. My name. Elena. Over and over, Elena, Elena, Elena. But here's the part that still keeps me up at night. I recognized the voice, not consciously, not right away, but somewhere deep in my memory, somewhere in the part of my brain that remembers things from childhood. I knew that voice. It was my grandfather. I know how that sounds. My grandfather died 22 years ago. His voice exists only in a few scratchy home videos and my increasingly unreliable childhood memories. There's no way I should have been able to recognize it. No way I should have been certain. But I was. As certain as I've ever been of anything. That whisper in the darkness. That was my grandfather's voice. I got out of my tent. I had to. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to stay inside, to wait for daylight, to not do exactly what I was about to do. But I couldn't help it. I had to know. The moonlight was bright enough to see by. The hoodoos cast long shadows across the amphitheater. And somewhere ahead of me, deeper into the canyon, the whisper continued. I followed it. The whisper led me through a maze of rock formations, past hoodoos that loomed like giants in the darkness, down narrow passages where the walls pressed close on either side, deeper and deeper into the backcountry, away from my camp, away from safety, away from everything rational and explainable. The moonlight was bright enough to navigate by, but it made everything look wrong. Shadows that were too dark. Rocks that seemed to shift when I looked away. The hoodoos watching me with their eyeless faces, judging me, following me with their stone gazes. I lost track of time, lost track of direction, lost track of everything except the whisper and the need to follow it. Part of me knew this was wrong. Part of me was screaming to turn around, to go back, to get out of this place while I still could. But the voice was so familiar, so comforting, so much like being a child again, safe in my grandfather's house, listening to his stories about the desert, stories he'd never finished, stories that always ended with him going quiet, staring at nothing, remembering something he wouldn't name. Now I was going to find out what he'd been remembering. Now I was going to learn what had haunted him for 67 years. I should have turned back. Should have recognized that I was being led somewhere. Should have remembered my grandfather's warning. Don't follow. But the whisper was so familiar, so comforting, like being a child again, falling asleep to the sound of my grandfather's voice. I found him at the bottom of a narrow slot canyon. Not my grandfather, not exactly, but something that wore his shape, something that had his voice, something that had been waiting in this place for 67 years, for someone to come looking, for someone curious enough to follow the coordinates, for someone foolish enough to ignore the warning. It was standing in a shaft of moonlight, a figure made of shadow and suggestion, the outline of a man I remembered from childhood, the voice I'd been following through the darkness. "Elena," it said, "you came. I knew you would. I left you the coordinates because I knew someday you'd be curious enough to follow them." I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only stand there as the thing that wore my grandfather's shape stepped closer. "I found something here," it continued, "in 1953, something that had been waiting in these rocks for a very long time, something that offered me a deal." "What kind of deal?" The words came out of my mouth without my permission. "The usual kind. The kind that seems fair until you understand the terms. It wanted to leave this place, wanted to see the world beyond these canyons, and I wanted to live forever." The figure stepped closer. I could see more of it now, more of the wrongness. The proportions were off, the arms too long, the neck bent at an angle that would have been impossible for a living person. But the face was my grandfather's, exactly as I remembered him from childhood, exactly as he looked in the photographs from his uranium prospecting days. Young, hopeful, before whatever happened in this canyon changed him. It kept its promise. Part of me has lived forever, the part that made the deal, the part that stayed here, waiting for someone to come find it. And the rest of you? The rest of me went home, got married, had children, watched those children have children of their own, lived a full life and died in my bed at 78 years old. Then what am I talking to? The figure tilted its head, that wrong angle again, like a marionette being controlled by someone who didn't quite understand how human bodies worked. "You're talking to the down payment, Elena, the piece of me that stayed behind to anchor the deal, the piece that's been waiting here, in this canyon, for someone to take my place." "Take your place?" "The deal requires a presence, an anchor, someone to hold the door open. I've been that anchor for 67 years, but my time is almost up. The thing that lives here, it needs someone new. And you thought I would agree to that? The figure smiled again. My grandfather's smile. But wrong. So wrong. You already have, Elena. You followed the coordinates. You ignored the warning. You came into this canyon of your own free will. That doesn't mean it does. That's exactly what it means. That's how the deal works. It doesn't force anyone. It doesn't have to. It just waits. Waits for someone curious enough to come looking. Someone foolish enough to ignore the warnings. The figure raised its hand, reached toward me. And now it's time for me to go. Time for you to stay. I found my voice. No. The figure tilted its head again. No. I don't accept. I didn't agree to anything. I just followed some coordinates. That's not a deal. The figure laughed, my grandfather's laugh. But wrong, hollow, empty. That's what they all say. That's what I said 67 years ago. I didn't agree to anything. I just picked up a rock. I just walked into a canyon. I just followed a sound. It stepped closer. But that's how the deal works, Elena. It doesn't require words. It doesn't require signatures. It just requires presence. It just requires attention. It just requires someone foolish enough to come looking. Then why leave the coordinates? Why lead me here? Because the anchor needs to be renewed. Because I'm tired of being half a person split between your world and this place. Because after 67 years, even this existence becomes unbearable. The figure's voice changed, became softer, sadder, almost human. I'm sorry, Elena, I truly am. I didn't want this for you. I hoped you'd be smarter than I was. I hoped you'd burn those coordinates and forget about Utah and live a normal life. Then why give them to me at all? Because I didn't have a choice. Because the deal requires a successor. Because if I don't find someone to take my place... The figure shuddered. If I don't find someone, I'll be here forever. Not just 67 years, not just a century, forever. Watching, waiting, calling, until the end of time. It reached toward me again. Please, Elena, let me go. Let me finally rest. Take my place. It's only fair. It's only. I ran. Don't ask me how I found my way back. Don't ask me how I navigated those slot canyons in the dark without breaking my neck. I just ran. Some part of me, some primal, survival-driven part, took over. My conscious mind was screaming. My body was moving. And somehow, I found my way out. I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead. Until I was in my car. Until I was 50 miles away and the sun was coming up. I pulled over at a gas station outside Panguitch, sat in my car, shaking, crying, trying to understand what had just happened. I looked at my hands. There were scratches on them, scrapes and cuts from running through the slot canyons, proof that it had been real, proof that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. I looked in the rearview mirror. My grandfather's face looked back at me. Just for a second, just long enough for me to see him smile. Then he was gone, and I was alone again. I've been back to work since then, back to my normal life, back to rocks and sediment and things I can measure and explain. My colleagues think I'm fine. My sister thinks I'm fine. Everyone thinks I'm fine. But I'm not fine. I haven't been fine since that night in Bryce Canyon. Because sometimes, late at night, I hear whispers, faint, distant, in a voice that sounds like my grandfather. Elena, come back. The deal isn't finished. The deal is never finished. I've tried to ignore them, tried to convince myself they're just stress, just memories, just the aftermath of a traumatic experience. But they're getting louder, getting clearer, getting harder to ignore. And last week I found something on my desk at work, a rock, a small piece of Bryce Canyon limestone. I don't know how it got there. I didn't bring it back. I'm certain I didn't bring it back. But there it was, sitting on my desk. And when I picked it up, I heard my grandfather's voice, clear as day. Time's running out, Elena. The anchor is fraying. Soon you'll have to come back. Soon you'll have to take my place. I threw the rock away, drove to a dump 50 miles from my house and buried it in the trash. 3 days later, it was back on my desk. I don't know what that means. I don't want to know, but I have a feeling, a terrible feeling, that someday I'm going to find out. Someday, the whispers are going to become commands. Someday, I'm going to drive back to Utah whether I want to or not. And someday, I'm going to become the new anchor, the new piece left behind, the new voice calling from the canyon, waiting for the next person foolish enough to follow. If you ever go hiking in Bryce Canyon, stay on the marked trails. Don't follow sounds into the backcountry. And if you find coordinates to a place someone in your family refused to talk about, maybe some mysteries are better left unsolved. Maybe some secrets are kept for good reasons. Maybe some places are meant to be forgotten. But if you do go, if you ignore every warning and follow every breadcrumb, and find yourself standing in a moonlit canyon talking to something that wears a dead man's face, run. Run and don't look back. And pray that whatever you've awakened doesn't follow you home. Because some deals once made can never be unmade, and some debts once owed must always be paid. When my uncle died, he left me his cabin. Everyone told me not to go there. I should have listened. My name is Derek Okonkwo. I'm 29 years old. I'm an outdoor photographer, landscapes mostly. The kind of images you see in calendars and coffee table books and corporate lobbies. I didn't plan to be a photographer. Studied engineering in college, had a good job lined up, was supposed to be sensible, make money, build a career. But I took a road trip after graduation, drove through Utah on the way to California, saw the sunrise over Monument Valley, and everything changed. I'd never seen anything so beautiful. Never felt so small and so connected at the same time. I quit my job 2 months later, bought a camera, started learning everything I could about light and composition and the way landscapes tell stories. I've spent the last 6 years chasing light across the American West. Monument Valley at sunrise, the Grand Canyon at golden hour, Antelope Canyon, when the light beams pierce the darkness like spotlights from heaven. I've photographed places that took my breath away. I've captured moments that made complete strangers cry when they saw my prints. I thought I understood what photography was about, thought it was about capturing beauty, about preserving moments, about showing people the world through new eyes, but I've never photographed anything like what I found in the Escalante. And I never will. Some things aren't meant to be captured. Some things don't want to be seen. And some things capture you instead. My Uncle Frank was a legend in our family. The black sheep who'd run away to Utah in his 20s and never come back. He'd built a cabin somewhere in the desert, lived off the grid, made money guiding tourists through slot canyons that only he knew how to find. He was the family mystery, the one no one talked about at Thanksgiving, the one whose name made my mother go quiet and my grandmother make the sign of the cross. We'd get postcards sometimes, strange, rambling letters about the land and the light and the things that lived in the cracks of the earth. Letters that made less and less sense as the years went on. Letters that my mother would read once and then burn in the fireplace. "He's lost," she'd say. "The desert took him. We have to let him go." Everyone thought he was eccentric, maybe a little crazy. When he died last spring, alone in his cabin, we thought that was the end of his story. But then the lawyer called, and everything changed. Uncle Frank had left everything to me, his cabin, his land, his equipment, and a letter that explained things I wasn't ready to understand. The letter was handwritten, 12 pages of increasingly desperate scrawl. The handwriting started neat and precise at the beginning. By the end, it was barely legible. Letters running together, words crossed out and rewritten. The marks of a man trying to explain something that resisted explanation. It talked about the slot canyons, about what he'd found in them, about the deal he'd made. "The land remembers," he wrote, "everything that ever happened here, every death, every sacrifice, every drop of blood spilled on these rocks. The land remembers. And sometimes, if you go deep enough, if you find the right crack in the right canyon at the right time, You can hear it remembering. He described the first time he'd heard the voices. 20 years ago, a routine scouting trip, a slot canyon he'd never explored before. They spoke to me, Derek, not in English, not in any language I recognized, but I understood them anyway. They told me about themselves, about how they died, about what they left behind. He'd gone back, again and again, drawn to the canyon like an addict drawn to his fix. I found something, Derek, something that shouldn't exist, something that science can't explain. He'd found one of those cracks in a slot canyon that didn't appear on any map, a canyon that, according to his letter, had been sacred to people who lived here long before the Navajo, long before anyone we have records of, long before the people who built the cliff dwellings and left their handprints on the canyon walls. They called it the listening place, he wrote, the place where you could hear the voices of everyone who ever died in these canyons, the place where the dead still speak. He'd gone there, he'd listened, and something had listened back. Something had started talking to him, something had made him a deal. I can't tell you what it offered me, he wrote. I can't even remember anymore. But I know I said yes. I know I agreed to something. And I know that whatever I agreed to, it's almost time to pay. The letter was dated 3 weeks before he died. I should have burned the letter. Should have sold the cabin site unseen and forgotten about my crazy uncle and his crazy stories. Should have stayed in Denver where the world makes sense and dead relatives don't leave inheritance letters about slot canyons where the dead still speak. But I'm a photographer. I see the world through a lens, and the images he described. A slot canyon that no one had ever photographed, light filtering through cracks that only he knew about. It was too tempting to resist. The way a flame is too tempting for a moth, the way the edge of a cliff is too tempting to look over, the way some things are too tempting for their own good. I drove to Utah in late September, the best time for photography in the Southwest. The light is softer, crowds are thinner, the colors are warmer. I'd made this trip dozens of times, but this time felt different. This time, I wasn't just chasing light, I was following breadcrumbs left by a dead man. The drive from Denver to Escalante takes about 8 hours. 8 hours of thinking about my uncle's letter, about the listening place, about what he'd found in those slot canyons. By the time I reached the turnoff to his property, it was nearly dark. The last 20 miles were unpaved road through Bureau of Land Management land. No lights, no other cars, no sign of human presence at all. Just me and the desert and the stars. The cabin was exactly what I expected. Small, rustic, isolated, surrounded by miles of red rock wilderness. No neighbors, no cell service, no connection to the outside world. Just me and the desert and my uncle's ghost. I found his journals in a locked chest under his bed. The key was hanging on a nail by the door, like he wanted whoever found the cabin to read them, like he needed someone to understand. 30 years of observations, maps of slot canyons, notes on light conditions, sketches of rock formations. The first journals were normal, professional, detailed. The work of a man who knew this land better than anyone. He'd mapped canyons that didn't appear on any official survey. He'd photographed formations that had never been documented. He'd explored places that no one else had ever seen. The first 10 years were beautiful, a record of discovery and wonder and the kind of passion that makes someone give up everything for a life in the wilderness. But around year 15, things started to change. The handwriting got shakier. The entries got stranger. And in the later journals, something else appeared. Descriptions of voices, conversations with things that weren't there, drawings of figures that seemed to emerge from the rock itself, faces in the sandstone, hands reaching from the walls, eyes that watched from every shadow, the journals of a man slowly losing his grip on reality, or a man who had seen something that reality couldn't explain. I spent 3 days reading them, 3 days in that cabin, surrounded by my uncle's madness or his truth. By the end, I couldn't tell the difference anymore. But here's the thing that made me decide to find the canyon: the photographs. Uncle Frank had taken hundreds of photographs of the listening place, long exposures, multiple angles, Every lighting condition imaginable. They were beautiful. The most beautiful slot canyon photographs I'd ever seen. Light and shadow and color in combinations that seemed impossible. The kind of images that win awards. The kind of images that make careers. And in every single photograph, the canyon was empty. Just rock and light and perfect composition. But the negatives showed something else. I don't know how to explain it. Photography is light and chemistry and physics. There's no mechanism by which a negative could show something different from the print. But Uncle Frank's negatives. They showed figures, dozens of them, standing in the slot canyon, watching the camera, figures that didn't appear in any of the prints, figures that shouldn't have been there at all. I found the canyon on my third day of searching. It was exactly where his map said it would be. A narrow crack in a cliff face. Easy to miss if you didn't know what you were looking for. Easy to walk right past. I'd hiked past this same cliff twice before. Hadn't noticed the crack at all. It was only on the third pass with the map in my hand and my uncle's detailed instructions that I finally saw it. The entrance was barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. I had to take off my camera pack and push it ahead of me. For a moment, in that narrow gap, I felt panic. What if I got stuck? What if I couldn't back out? What if this was a trap? But then I was through, and I found myself in the most beautiful slot canyon I'd ever seen. Inside was the most beautiful slot canyon I'd ever seen. The walls were 100 feet high, smooth and curved, striped with layers of red and orange and cream, millions of years of sediment compressed and carved by water that no longer flowed. Light filtered down from above in beams so perfect they looked staged, like someone had set up studio lights in a cathedral, like God himself was doing a photo shoot. The floor was soft sand, red sand that glowed in the reflected light. My footprints were the only marks on it. I was the first person to walk here in how long? How long had this place been hidden? How long had it been waiting? The air was cool. The silence was absolute. I felt like I'd stepped out of the ordinary world and into something else, something sacred, something forbidden. It was everything a photographer could dream of, and it was completely silent. No wind, no birds, no sound at all, just the light and the rock and the weight of something ancient. I set up my camera, started shooting. The light was incredible, the colors were incredible. Everything about this place was incredible. I worked my way down the canyon, shot wide, shot tight, shot every angle I could find. The light kept changing as the sun moved overhead, beams appearing and disappearing, colors shifting from warm orange to cool purple. I must have taken 200 photographs in the first hour, maybe more. I lost count, lost track of everything except the images. That's what happens when you find a place like this. The world narrows down to the frame, to the light, to the moment. Everything else disappears. I was so focused on the images that I didn't notice the temperature dropping, didn't notice the light changing in ways that didn't match the sun's movement, didn't notice that the entrance behind me was getting smaller, didn't notice that I wasn't alone anymore. The first voice came from behind me. "You're Frank's nephew." Not a question. A statement. I spun around. No one there. Just the empty canyon. Just the light filtering down from above. "He said you'd come, eventually. He said someone always comes." The voice was everywhere, coming from the walls, coming from the rock itself. He made a deal with us a long time ago. We let him photograph this place, we let him capture the light, and in exchange, the temperature dropped again. My breath came out in clouds. In exchange, he promised to send us someone new, someone to listen, someone to remember. I ran for the entrance, the crack in the cliff, the way out. My feet slipped on the soft sand, my lungs burned, my heart pounded so hard I could hear it echoing off the canyon walls. Or maybe that was the voices. They were everywhere now, speaking in languages I didn't understand, speaking in languages that had been dead for thousands of years, speaking my name. Derek, Derek, Derek. I reached the place where the entrance should have been, but it wasn't there anymore. Where there had been an opening, now there was just rock. Solid, unbroken, as if the entrance had never existed. I pressed my hands against the stone, cold, smooth, real. No, I said. No, no, no. I pounded on the rock, screamed, clawed at the stone until my fingers bled. Nothing. The canyon had closed around me. The listening place had sealed itself shut, and I was trapped inside with the voices of the dead. I spent 3 days in that canyon, 3 days with no food, no water, no way out. 3 days listening to voices that came from the rock. The first day, I tried everything, searched every inch of the canyon walls for the entrance, climbed as high as I could, screamed until my throat was raw. Nothing. The entrance was gone. The canyon had closed around me like a mouth. The second day, I started to hear them clearly. Voices of people who had died in these canyons, hundreds of them, thousands. Every death that had ever occurred in the Escalante, preserved in the stone like fossils. A Fremont hunter who fell from a cliff 1,000 years ago. A Spanish explorer who died of thirst in 1672. A Mormon settler whose wagon tipped into a slot canyon in 1876. A young woman who got lost hiking in 1983. They told me their stories, all of them. Whether I wanted to hear them or not, they told me how they died, what they felt in their final moments, what they wished they'd done differently, what they left behind. By the third day, I couldn't tell their voices from my own thoughts. I was thinking in their memories, seeing through their eyes, dying their deaths over and over, trapped in a loop of ancient pain. I stopped trying to escape. I just sat there, listening, waiting for it to end, waiting for my voice to join theirs. On the fourth morning, I woke up outside, lying in the sand, 1/2 mile from my uncle's cabin. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Didn't remember how I'd gotten there. Didn't remember anything except the voices. Thousands of voices, all speaking at once, all telling their stories, all remembering. I lay there in the sand as the sun came up, feeling the warmth on my face, feeling alive. I should have been dead. 3 days without water in the desert. I should have been a corpse. But I wasn't. Something had let me go. Something had carried me out of the canyon and deposited me in the sand. Like leaving a message, like saying, "You've heard what we wanted you to hear. Now go tell others." My camera was gone. My equipment was gone. But I was alive. I don't know how. I don't know why. The only thing I know for certain is that the canyon let me go, and that it kept something of mine in exchange. Something more than just equipment. Something I haven't been able to identify. Something that makes me feel hollow when I try to remember what it was. I tried to find the canyon again. Went back to the coordinates, searched for the crack in the cliff. It wasn't there. Just solid rock. As if the listening place had never existed. But sometimes, when I'm developing photographs, when I'm alone in my dark room, I see things in the negatives that aren't in the prints. Figures standing in landscapes I've photographed, faces peering out from slot canyons and desert vistas. The dead of the Escalante, still watching, still waiting, still remembering. I never went back to my uncle's cabin, sold it to a developer who wanted to build a resort. I hope they never break ground. I hope they never find what's buried in that land. I hope the listening place stays hidden forever. But I know, deep down, that places like that don't stay hidden. They wait, they listen, and eventually, they find someone else to remember. It's been 8 months since I escaped from that canyon. I've tried to move on, tried to forget, tried to go back to photographing landscapes like nothing ever happened. But I can't. Every time I raise my camera, I wonder what the negative will show. Every time I enter a slot canyon, I listen for voices in the rock. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the dead. Their stories live inside me now. Thousands of deaths, thousands of final moments, thousands of lives ended in these canyons preserved in stone. I carry them with me everywhere I go. And sometimes I think they're not just memories. Sometimes I think they're still talking, still trying to tell me something, still waiting for me to understand. Last night I heard a new voice, one I didn't recognize. A young man. He said he died in a slot canyon last week, said the flash flood came out of nowhere, Said he never even saw it coming. He wanted to tell me his story. Wanted someone to remember. The listening place is still out there, still collecting, still waiting, and now I'm part of it, whether I like it or not. If you're planning to visit the Utah backcountry, if you're thinking about exploring slot canyons off the beaten path, learn from my mistake. Tell someone exactly where you're going. Bring more water than you think you need. And if you find a canyon that doesn't appear on any map, if you find a place where the walls seem to whisper, if you find the listening place, turn around, walk away, don't look back. Some places are meant to be forgotten, and some stories are meant to stay buried in stone. Every year on October 17th, it happens again. This year, I finally understand why. My name is Teresa Yellowhorse. I'm 46 years old. I've been a ranger for the Bureau of Land Management for 22 years. I've worked across the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada. I'm Dene, Navajo. Grew up on the reservation near Chinle. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the land, about the spirits that lived in certain places, about the doorways between our world and somewhere else. I thought they were just stories, the kind of tales old women told to scare children into behaving. I joined the BLM because I wanted to protect the land, to preserve the wild places that my ancestors had called sacred, to help other people understand why these landscapes mattered. I didn't expect to spend my career guarding a door, but that's what I've been doing for the last 12 years. I've been stationed at Arches, the park with the famous sandstone arches, the park that 2 million visitors come to see every year, the park with a section of backcountry that we've kept closed for longer than anyone can remember, the park with something inside it that should never be let out. The closed section doesn't appear on any tourist map. It's not mentioned in any of the official literature. If you ask about it at the visitor center, the rangers will tell you it's closed for resource protection, archaeological sensitivity, fragile formations, the usual bureaucratic explanations. That's what we tell the public. That's not the truth. The truth is that something lives in that section of the park, something that was here before the arches, before the rock itself, something that we've been trying to keep contained for almost 100 years. And every year, on October 17th, it tries to get out. I didn't believe in any of this when I started. Thought the stories were just hazing for new rangers, the kind of folklore that grows up around any wild place, the kind of stories that people tell to make their jobs seem more important than they are. I've been a ranger for 22 years. I've worked in places that people called haunted. I've heard ghost stories around every campfire. I've always known they were just stories. Until Arches, until the closed section, until I saw what lives in that arch. My supervisor, a 60-year-old Navajo man named Ray Begay, tried to warn me. We were standing on the rim of the canyon, looking down at the closed section, when he told me the truth. The old ones put something here, he said, long before us, long before anyone remembers. They put it here because this was the only place strong enough to hold it. What is it? He shook his head. No one knows anymore. The people who knew are gone. The language they spoke is dead. All we have are the rules. What rules? He pulled out a worn notebook. Handwritten pages, multiple handwritings, the accumulated knowledge of generations of rangers who had guarded this place. Don't go into the closed section, not ever, not for any reason. Don't remove anything from the closed section. Don't add anything to it. Don't take photographs. Don't record sounds. Don't try to study it or understand it. He turned the page. And whatever you do, don't answer if something calls your name. I looked at the notebook, looked at the warnings written there. Some of them went back to the 1920s. Has anyone ever broken the rules? Ray was quiet for a long moment. 3 times that we know of. The results were, he searched for the right word, instructive. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. Follow the rules, Teresa. I know they sound crazy. I know you probably think this is all superstition and old wives' tales. But the rules exist for a reason. The rules have kept this thing contained for almost 100 years. What happens if the rules fail? He didn't answer, just looked at the arch, at the doorway to nowhere, at the thing that waited inside. Pray you never find out. I followed the rules. For 11 years, I followed the rules, did my job, maintained the trails, helped the tourists find their way to Delicate Arch and Landscape Arch and all the other formations they'd come to see. I answered their questions about geology and history and the best times to photograph. I smiled and posed for selfies and pretended that everything was normal. And every October 17th, I stayed in my cabin and listened to the voices calling my name from the darkness. 11 years of following the rules, 11 years of keeping watch, 11 years of not answering. I thought I was strong, thought I could handle it forever. I was wrong. Because last October, something changed. Until last October. October 17th started like any other day. Morning briefing, trail assignments, the usual work. But something felt different. A tension in the air. A heaviness that I couldn't explain. The other rangers were nervous, jumpy, watching the sky like they expected a storm. Even the tourists seemed affected. Fewer people on the trails than usual for mid-October. Fewer cars in the parking lot. Like something was keeping them away. Ray pulled me aside after the briefing. His face was serious, more serious than I'd ever seen. "Tonight's the night," he said. "Stay away from the closed section. Stay in your cabin. Don't answer any voices. You've told me this every year, Ray. Nothing's ever happened." "Something always happens. You just haven't been paying attention." He looked older in that moment. Tired. Like the weight of all those October 17ths had finally caught up with him. "This year feels different," he said. "I don't know why. But something's changing, something's shifting. Be extra careful tonight." That night, I went back to my cabin, made dinner, read a book, tried to pretend it was a normal evening. Outside, the desert was quiet. Too quiet. Even the coyotes weren't howling. Even the wind wasn't blowing. Just silence. Deep, heavy silence. The kind of silence that feels like the world is holding its breath. At 11:47, the power went out. Not unusual. We lose power all the time out here. Old infrastructure, weather, nothing to worry about. But this felt different. The darkness was too complete, too sudden, like something had swallowed the light. I lit a candle, waited for the backup generator to kick in. It didn't. I checked my phone. No signal, no bars, nothing. I was alone in the dark, completely cut off from the outside world. And somewhere outside my window, something was moving. The first voice came at midnight, from outside my cabin, calling my name. "Teresa." I ignored it, just like Ray told me to. "Teresa, come outside. I need your help." It sounded like Ray. Exactly like Ray, the same cadence, the same accent, the same way he pronounced my name with the emphasis on the second syllable. "Teresa, please, I'm hurt. I need you to come outside." I stayed in my cabin, hands shaking, heart pounding, remembering the rules. But here's the thing that broke me. The voice changed. It wasn't Ray anymore. It was my mother. My mother who died when I was 14. My mother whose voice I hadn't heard in 32 years. "Teresa, sweetheart, it's cold out here. Please let me in. I've missed you so much." I didn't open the door, but I went to the window. I had to see. I had to know if it was really her. There was nothing outside, just the desert, just the rocks, just the arch that gave the closed section its name, standing in the moonlight. A natural bridge of stone that looked like a doorway to nowhere. The arch was beautiful in the daylight, a photographer's dream. Perfect symmetry, perfect framing, the kind of formation that brings millions of tourists to arches every year. But at night, it looked different. At night, it looked like what it really was. A door, a threshold, a passage between our world and somewhere else, and standing in that doorway, a figure, too tall, too thin, with my mother's face. I watched it for hours, watched it shift and change. One moment it looked like my mother, the next like Ray, the next like my grandmother who died when I was 7, the next like people I'd never seen before. Faces that must have belonged to people who'd died in this desert, people who'd broken the rules, people who'd answered when something called their name. There was William Morrow, the ranger from 1923. I recognized him from the photograph in the old records. There was a woman in pioneer dress. Her face was burned, her hair was gone, but she was smiling. There was a child, a little boy. Couldn't have been more than 8 years old. He waved at me. Just waved, like he wanted me to come play. As the night went on, more figures gathered, dozens of them, standing at the arch, looking at my cabin, waiting. They didn't try to approach, didn't try to break down my door, didn't do anything threatening at all. They just stood there, watching, calling my name, one after another, in voices that sounded exactly like the people I'd loved and lost. "Teresa, come outside. We miss you." "Teresa, it's cold out here. Please." "Teresa, don't you want to see us again? Don't you want to be with us?" The hardest one was my mother, dead of cancer when I was 14. Her voice exactly as I remembered it. "Teresa, sweetheart, I've been waiting so long. I've been waiting in the dark, and I'm so scared. Please come get me. Please take me home." I covered my ears. I cried. I prayed to every god I knew. But I didn't open the door. I didn't answer. I didn't go to them. At dawn, they vanished. One moment they were there. The next, the arch was empty. Just stone and sand and the first light of morning. I watched the sun rise over the desert. Watched the light turn the red rock to gold. Watched the ordinary world reassert itself as if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't just spent the night being called by the dead. I sat on my floor until Ray came to check on me. I heard his truck pull up outside, heard his boots on my porch. For a terrible moment, I wasn't sure if it was really him. Wasn't sure if I could trust my senses anymore. He knocked on my door. "Teresa, you okay in there?" His voice, not the voice from last night, his real voice. I opened the door. He took one look at my face and nodded. He'd seen that look before. On other rangers, on other watchers, on everyone who spends their October 17th staring at the arch. "You saw them. What are they?" "We don't know. Not really. We just know they can't leave. Not as long as the arch stands. Not as long as someone keeps watching." "What happens if no one watches?" Ray was quiet for a long moment. "In 1923, a ranger named William Morrow decided the stories were nonsense. He went into the closed section on October 17th, walked right up to the arch." "What happened?" "They found his clothes the next morning, folded neatly at the base of the arch. No body, no tracks, no sign of what happened to him." He looked at the arch through my window. The morning light was hitting it now, turning it gold and rose and beautiful. Nothing like the door to darkness it had been just hours ago. But that night, there was one more figure standing in the doorway. He was quiet for a moment. "That's what happens, Teresa. When someone goes through, when someone breaks the rules, they don't die. Not exactly. They become part of it. Part of whatever lives on the other side. Part of the door itself." "Why?" "I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. The old ones who built this place are gone. The language they spoke is dead. All we have are the rules and the warnings and the knowledge that if we don't keep watching—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I understood. Some doors are held closed by watching. Some doors only stay shut because someone is standing guard. And if no one watches, if everyone leaves, the door opens, and whatever's on the other side comes through. I've been watching the arch for 12 years now. Every October 17th, every night the figures gather. Every night they call my name. Every night they wear the faces of people I've lost. And every morning they disappear. I don't know how much longer I can do this. Don't know how many more years I can watch the faces of my dead called to me from that doorway. But I know what happens if I stop. If no one watches. If the arch stands empty on October 17th. So I stay. I watch. And I try not to answer when my mother's voice calls my name from the darkness. Ray retired 3 years ago. Couldn't take it anymore. Said he'd spent too many October 17ths looking at the faces of his dead. I don't blame him. I think about retiring myself, sometimes, about handing this burden to someone else, about finally getting away from the arch and the figures and the voices that call my name. But then I think about William Morrow, about the ranger who walked through the arch in 1923, about his clothes folded neatly at the base, about his face appearing in the doorway the next year. If I leave, if everyone leaves, what happens then? What happens when no one is watching? What happens when the rules are forgotten? I don't know. And I'm not sure I want to find out. My grandmother used to tell me that some places are meant to be guarded, that every generation has a responsibility to the next, that the old ones trusted us to keep their doors closed. I didn't understand what she meant when I was young. I understand now. I've been watching the arch for 12 years now. Every October 17th, every night the figures gather, every night they call my name, every night they wear the faces of people I've lost, and every morning they disappear. But this year, something was different. This year, when the figures vanished at dawn, one of them stayed, just for a moment, just long enough for me to see her face clearly. My mother. She looked at me, smiled, and mouthed 3 words. See you soon. I don't know what that means. I don't want to know. But I have a feeling, I have a terrible feeling, that next October 17th will be different. That I've been watching this door for long enough, that it's almost time for me to walk through it and become another figure in the arch, another voice calling from the darkness, another face wearing the shape of someone's lost loved one. Forever. If you ever visit Arches National Park, stay on the marked trails. Don't ask about the closed sections, and if you hear someone calling your name in the desert at night, don't answer. Some doors are meant to stay closed, and some things are meant to stay inside. I'm still at Arches, still watching, still following the rules, but I've started writing things down, started documenting everything I've seen over the past 12 years. Every October 17th, every figure, every voice. Someone needs to know the truth about this place. Someone needs to understand why we guard it. Someone needs to carry on when I'm gone, because the arch isn't going anywhere, and whatever lives inside it, whatever waits in that doorway to nowhere, it's patient, it's hungry, and it never stops calling. My grandmother used to tell me that some places are sacred for a reason, that the old ones didn't mark certain places as forbidden because of superstition. They marked them because they knew, because they'd seen what happens when certain doors are opened, because they understood that some things, once let out, can never be put back in. I understand now. I understand why the closed section has been closed for 100 years. I understand why we guard it every October 17th. I understand why some doors must never be opened. And I understand why someone has to watch, always, forever, until the end of time.